I'm sure we've all heard the word pandemic thrown around here and there over the year, but what exactly does pandemic mean? A pandemic is basically just an epidemic that spread through several countries or continents. COVID-19 is a pandemic. It spread through most of the world's countries. The Black Death was an epidemic. It infected Europe and Asia and killed an estimated 50 million people. The plague was supposed to have originated in Asia in the 14th century and probably spread to Europe through trading ships. When the ships docked at the Sicilian port of Messina, most of the sailors on the ships were dead and had black boils that oozed pus and blood. The Sicilian authorities tried ordering the death ships out of the harbor, but they were a few moments too late. In the next 5 years, the plague that we call the Black Death would kill nearly a third of Europe's entire population, which at the time was 80 million. An Italian poet by the name of Giovanni Boccaccio wrote what he had observed about the disease. In men and women alike, at the beginning of the malady, certain swellings, either on the groin or under the armpits, waxed to the bigness of a common apple, others to the size of an egg, some more and some less, and these the vulgar named plague boils. These plague boils were followed by a number of other symptoms: fever, chills, vomiting, diarrhea, intense pain, and in most cases, death. The Black Death was extremely contagious. Boccaccio wrote, "The mere touching of the clothes appeared to itself to communicate the malady to the toucher." People infected with plague had to stay inside their homes for 40 days, from which the term quarantine was derived. Its root word is quarantana, which means 40 days. The plague is caused by a bacteria called Yersinia pestis. The bacteria is spread through fleas and rats and became airborne, which earned the name pneumonic plague. It was called the pneumonic plague because pneuma means breath, and a breath was all it took to pass the disease from one person to another. Physicians treated the plague with unreliable and unsanitary techniques like bloodletting, withdrawing blood from a patient to cure a disease, and boil lancing, popping a boil so the pus would come out. They also used practices like burning aromatic herbs and bathing in rosewater or vinegar. Many people believed that the plague was some sort of punishment from God, retribution for sins against God. With this mindset, they believed the only way to overcome the plague was to win back God's forgiveness. Some people thought that they had to exterminate their communities of heretics and troublemakers. Jews, for example, were given the choice of converting from their religion or being burned alive. Thousands of them were killed in 1348 and 1349. The Black Death never really ended. It made a comeback in the 17th century as the bubonic plague, starting in a poor and crowded place in London. It started slowly and gradually became more powerful. By May of 1665, 43 had died. 43 became 6,137 by June and 7,036 by July. When August came, 31,159 people died. In that summer alone, 15% of London's population had been wiped out. When one member of a family that lives together gets infected, the whole family goes with them into quarantine, exposing everyone to the bacteria and increasing the chances of plague spreading. The house is sealed and watchmen are hired to see to it that they remain sealed. On the houses, red crosses were painted to distinguish them from all the others. The words, "Lord have mercy on us," were written beside the cross. The dead were buried in plague pits at the end of the day. Some had been buried separately and given proper burials if they could afford it. The symptoms were the same as Boccaccio wrote, and it was caused by the same bacterium. The plague boils were now called buboes, taken from the Greek word for groin. This time around, people tried different methods to treat the disease. They believed holding a posy of flowers to their noses prevented the contagion of plague. A lot of them thought the bad air gave them the disease. They also had fumigation, which is burning pesticides to kill the rats that were carrying the bacteria. They used that until winter began and the cold killed the pests for them. The most popular theory of how the bubonic plague ended was because of people quarantining themselves and lessening contagion. And right now, we're dealing with another widespread medical emergency. It was named COVID-19, or formally 2019 nCoV, because it's caused by a respiratory virus called coronavirus, or SARS-CoV-2, one of the 7 types of coronavirus. COVID-19 stands for Coronavirus Infectious Disease, and it started in 2019, hence the 19. We're handling it much better than the plagues in the 14th and 17th centuries, since we have better resources, but this is admittedly less deadly, so we have a kind of unfair advantage when you compare this and the plagues. Unlike bacteria though, viruses can't be cured, since bacteria are living organisms and viruses are not. You can only treat the symptoms. There are currently about 22 million infected with the virus, but the death rate is only 3.5%. Although people that had illnesses beforehand like cystic fibrosis, cancer, and diabetes are more likely to develop serious sicknesses. The most common symptoms of COVID-19 are fever, dry cough, and tiredness. Some people may experience sore throat, diarrhea, rashes, discoloration of the skin, headaches, and loss of smell and taste. There are also serious symptoms like shortness of breath, called dyspnea, loss of movement or speech, and chest pain. The first case of the virus was reported in Wuhan, China late last year. From there, it just kept on spreading and spreading. You've probably had a coronavirus before. Like I said, there are 7 types, and some just give you the common cold. Only 2 have caused the widespread outbreak like this. SARS-CoV-1 caused the SARS outbreak in the early 2000s. The virus enters through the respiratory tract. Someone who's infected by the virus and shows symptoms might have inflamed lungs, making it hard to breathe. They could get pneumonia, an infection in the alveoli, the tiny air sacs in the lungs where blood exchanges oxygen with carbon dioxide. If a doctor did a CT scan on them, they would find something called ground glass opacity, shadows or dark patches in the lungs. More than 8 out of 10 COVID-19 cases are only mild. In some of the more severe cases, patients get acute respiratory distress syndrome, or ARDS, a few days after the symptoms show. ARDS can cause rapid breathing, a fast heart rate, dizziness, and sweating. It damages the blood vessels and tissues in the alveoli, making debris fall and collect there. A lot of people with ARDS need to be put on a ventilator to help them breathe, because doing so on their own can be difficult, or in a few cases, nearly impossible. As fluid collects in the lungs, they carry less oxygen to the blood, meaning the blood might not be able to supply the internal organs with enough oxygen to survive and function properly. This can cause the liver, lungs, and kidney to stop working. Of course, not everyone who has COVID-19 has serious symptoms. There are even some people that are asymptomatic. They don't show symptoms at all. And many show only minor symptoms and don't need hospitalization. The World Health Organization said that 172 countries are engaged in discussions to possibly participate in COVAX, a global initiative aiming to work with vaccine manufacturers to provide the countries worldwide fair access to effective vaccines. COVAX has the most diverse COVID-19 vaccine portfolio. It has 9 vaccine candidates and another 9 under evaluation. The Philippines is one of the 172 countries participating. COVAX hopes to deliver 2 billion doses of vaccines that would have passed regulatory approval by the end of 2021. The vaccines will be distributed equally to all the countries joining, proportional to their populations. The body's immune system produces natural antibodies. Antibodies are proteins that help fight infections. Antibodies are produced by a kind of lymphocyte. A lymphocyte is a type of white blood cell, or leukocyte, that, as I said, produces antibodies and alerts other cells when it finds a pathogen, which is just anything that gets you sick. Lymphocytes also help the body remember previous pathogens and recognize them if they come back. Once the body has created an antibody, a copy will stay inside the body so that if the same disease decides it wants a rematch, it can be fought off more quickly before it can get you properly sick, creating an immunity. That's basically how vaccines work. You get a safer version of a disease released into your body. Your immune system recognizes it as an enemy and creates an antibody against it. Copies of the antibody are stored to use if the actual pathogen comes along, something like an acquired immunity. All we can do for now is hope that they get that vaccine ASAP so we can all acquire that immunity. Until then, we just have to contribute to the slowing down of the virus's spreading. Because, to quote a rather famous song from High School Musical, we're all in this together.